Found in the walls of a gas station after 14 years, what was hidden solves the case. The pry bar bit into the plaster with a satisfying crunch, sending a puff of white dust into the stale air of the old gas station bay. It was the smell of forgotten things, of dried oil and mouse droppings, and the faint, lingering ghost of gasoline. Marco, sweat beading on his forehead and tracing clean lines through the grime on his temples, put his shoulder into it. He was only 22, strung from a life of lifting things he shouldn't have to. And the wall groaned in protest. "Put your back into it, kid," grunted Sal from across the bay, his voice a gravelly echo in the cavernous space. Sal was a mountain of a man, his belly straining the fabric of a grease-stained t-shirt, his face a permanent roadmap of sun and scowls. He was tossing bags of old hardened concrete mix into the bed of their pickup, each one landing with a heavy, final thud. "I'm trying," Marco grunted back, leveraging the bar. "This section's different, it's like they double-layered it here." The gas station, a relic from a time when attendants wore bow ties and checked your oil, had been shuttered for 14 years. It stood on a forgotten stretch of highway, a monument to economic decay. The new owner, some slick developer from the city, wanted it gutted. Walls, pumps, everything, a fresh start. For Marco, it was just another job, another day of dust and ache, another few $100 to keep his mother's ancient air conditioner rattling through the summer. He worked the pry bar along a seam, and a larger section of plaster gave way, not crumbling, but breaking off in a solid, dinner plate-sized chunk. It fell to the concrete floor with a clatter that was somehow sharper, more distinct than the soft crumble of the plaster around it. Marco peered into the newly formed cavity. Behind the plaster was not the expected woodlath or cinder block, but another layer of drywall, newer, smoother. Its seams taped with a precision that was jarringly out of place with the rest of the dilapidated structure. "Hey, Sal," Marco called out, his voice a little tight. "You gotta see this." Sal, never one to be hurried, finished heaving a bag and ambled over, wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans. "What now? Found a rat's nest? A gold brick?" "I don't know," Marco said, his breath fogging slightly in the cool darkness of the wall cavity. He reached in, his fingers brushing against the smooth, cool surface of the hidden drywall. It felt wrong, purposeful. He tapped it with his knuckle. It was hollow, but not in the way a normal wall was hollow. The sound was dense, muffled. "So, it's a patch job," Sal said, unimpressed. "Some lazy bastard covered up a hole instead of fixing it right. Happens all the time. Now stop gawking and get back to work." Clock's ticking, but Marco couldn't shake the feeling. It was a cold knot in his stomach, a primal hum of wrongness. The patch was too big, too deliberate. It spanned a section of wall nearly 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, right behind where the old greasy service counter must have stood. He took his hammer from his tool belt, the heavy one with the clawed back, and gave the hidden wall a tentative tap-thud. "A dull, final sound, kid, I swear to God." Sal started, turning back toward the truck. Marco ignored him. He swung the hammer harder. The drywall cracked, a spiderweb of fissures spreading from the point of impact. He swung again, and a piece broke free, revealing not darkness, not insulation, but something else. Something pale. He dropped the hammer. It clanged against the concrete, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Sal stopped, turning around slowly, his perpetually annoyed expression melting into one of wary curiosity. "What is it?" Marco didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had seized up. He knelt down, his knees cracking, and reached into the hole he'd made. His fingers, calloused and dirty, brushed against a texture that was both rough and smooth, like old leather. He pulled back a larger piece of the broken drywall. The light from the bare bulb hanging in the center of the bay spilled into the cavity, illuminating what lay within. It wasn't a rat's nest. It wasn't a gold brick dot. It was a hand. The skin was waxy and discolored. A mottled landscape of pale yellow and bruised purple stretched taut over delicate bones. A simple silver ring, tarnished with age, was still on the fourth finger. The hand was small, slender. A woman's hand. It was curled slightly, as if reaching for something just out of its grasp. Marco scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the wall, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. He hit the base of a rusted hydraulic lift and stopped, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The dust he'd kicked up swirled in the beam of light. A frantic dance of tiny particles. Sal stood frozen for a moment, his mouth agape. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty gray. Jesus Christ. Marco. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a raw, horrified awe. He peered into the hole, his big body casting a shadow over the grisly discovery. The hand was attached to an arm, bent at an unnatural angle. Marco could see a sliver of fabric, the faded floral print of a dress, bunched up around the wrist. The smell hit them then. It hadn't been noticeable before, lost in the general mustiness of the old station. But now, with the tomb breached, it seeped out a cloying, sickly sweet odor of decay that clung to the back of the throat. It was the smell of old secrets and final desperate breaths. "Don't touch anything," Sal whispered, his voice hoarse. Don't fucking touch anything." He fumbled for his phone, his thick fingers clumsy and shaking. He stabbed at the screen, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Marco just stared at the wall, at the hole, at the silent reaching hand. The image was burned into his mind. A perfect, horrifying photograph. The delicate fingers, the tarnished ring, the way the light caught the edge of a broken fingernail. The world outside the bay doors seemed to cease to exist. The distant hum of traffic, the chirping of birds, the rustle of the wind was all gone, swallowed by the profound, suffocating silence of this concrete tomb. 14 years. For 14 years, this station had stood empty, guarding its secret. Cars had driven past, kids had probably dared each other to break the windows. The seasons had turned, and all the while, she had been in there, waiting. Marco felt a wave of nausea roll through him. He scrambled to his feet and stumbled toward the open bay door, desperate for fresh air. He burst out into the blinding sunlight, his eyes watering, and bent over, resting his hands on his knees. Gulping in air that now felt impossibly clean and sweet, the world rushed back in a dizzying wave of color and sound. A red car sped down the highway. A plastic bag danced across the cracked asphalt. It was all so normal, so mundane, it felt like a violent insult. He could hear Sal's panicked voice behind him, talking to the 911 dispatcher. "Yeah, we're at the old Beacon Gas on Route 7. "No, we were. We were tearing down a wall. It's a body, I think. God, I think it's a whole body." Marco straightened up, his gaze drawn back to the dark maw of the garage. It was no longer just a job site, it was a crime scene, a grave. The injustice of it was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. Someone had put her there. Someone had built her a coffin of plaster and drywall, sealed her away from the world, and then simply walked away. They had gone on with their life for 14 years. They had eaten meals, and slept in a bed, and laughed, and breathed the free air. While she was trapped in the dark, her silent hand reaching for a rescue that would never come. He thought of his own mother, her hands worn from a lifetime of cleaning other people's houses, but always warm, always alive. He thought of his sister, her fingers constantly flying across the screen of her phone. Her nails painted a different bright color every week. Hands were for holding, for working, for waving hello and goodbye. They were not meant to be found. Like this, forgotten and cold. Sealed inside a wall, a single police cruiser was the first to arrive, its siren a rising shriek that cut through the afternoon haze. It pulled up in a cloud of dust, and a lone officer stepped out, a young woman, with a stern face and wary eyes, her name tag read Deputy Miller. She took one look at Marco's pale, stricken face and Sal's trembling form, and her hand instinctively went to the radio on her shoulder. "Dispatch. I'm on scene at the old Beacon," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You're gonna want to send a detective, and the ME, yeah, It looks like it's gonna be one of those She approached them slowly, her eyes scanning the property, taking in the derelict building, the rusty pumps, the overgrown weeds. You. To the ones who called it in, Sal just nodded, unable to speak. I am, Marco managed to say, his voice thin. We were hired to clear this place out. Deputy Miller's gaze was sharp, analytical. She wasn't looking at him as a person, but as a piece of the puzzle, a witness. And you found what, exactly? Show me. Marco's feet felt like lead, but he turned and led her back toward the bay. He couldn't bring himself to look. At the hole again, he pointed a trembling finger. In there, behind the plaster. The deputy walked to the edge of the opening, her boots crunching softly on the debris. She didn't flinch. She just stood there for a long moment, her expression unreadable, her silhouette framed against the dark interior. Then she turned back, her eyes locking onto Marco's. 14 years, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a realization. 14 years, and no one knew. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. The sun beat down, but Marco felt a chill crawl up his spine, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold from the wall, the cold from the grave. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his life had just been irrevocably split into two parts. The time before he swung that hammer, and the time after. And he knew that the ghost of that small reaching hand would haunt the second part, forever. The cliffhanger wasn't what would happen next. It was the suffocating, unanswered question that now filled the air, as thick and foul as the smell of decay. Who was she, and who had put her there? The silence of the gas station seemed to hold its breath, waiting for an answer that had been denied for far too long. The world had kept spinning, but right here, on this forgotten patch of asphalt, time had stopped 14 years ago, and Marco had just smashed the clock. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing lights and yellow tape. More cars arrived, then a van from the medical examiner's office, and finally, a pair of unmarked sedans. Men in suits, detectives, moved with a quiet, grim purpose, their voices low and serious. They cordoned off the entire station, their presence transforming the derelict property into a place of grim importance. Marco and Sal were separated, questioned, their initial shock giving way to the exhausting, repetitive process of official statements. Marco sat on the tailgate of Sal's pickup, a bottle of water clutched in his hand, the plastic crinkling under his tense grip. He told his story over and over again. The pry bar, the strange smooth patch, the hammer, the hand. Each time he said the word hand, the image flashed behind his eyes, vivid and sickening. A detective named Gable, a man with tired eyes, and a suit that looked too warm for the day, was the one who seemed to be in charge. He had a gentle, almost fatherly demeanor that did little to mask the sharp intelligence in his gaze. You did the right thing, son, Gable said, after Marco had finished his third recitation of the events, calling it in right away. Not disturbing anything further. Marco just nodded, staring at the ground. Who do you think she is? Gable sighed, a long, weary sound. It's too soon to say. 14 years is a long time. People disappear. Sometimes, they're never found. Sometimes they're found in walls. He looked over at the bay, where a team from the ME's office was now carefully, painstakingly, dismantling the rest of the hidden wall. They worked with small saws and brushes, their movements as delicate as archaeologists at a dig. The sun began to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The garish, beautiful colors felt obscene, a mockery of the grim proceedings on the ground. The artificial glare of portable floodlights took over, casting long, dancing shadows across the scene. Marco watched as they finally removed the last section of drywall. He couldn't see everything from his vantage point, but he saw enough. He saw the slump of a human form folded into the narrow space between the studs. He saw the dark, matted tangle of what must have been hair. And he saw the team leader, a woman in blue scrubs, stand up and pull off her mask, her face pale and set. She walked over to Detective Gable and spoke to him in a low voice. Gable listened, his expression grim, and then he walked back over to Marco. The gentle demeanor was gone. His face was a mask of cold fury. "We need you to come down to the station, Marco," he said, his voice flat. "We need a formal recorded statement." "Okay," Marco said, his own voice barely a whisper, "and we're going to need to hold on to your tools for a while, and your clothes." The implication hit Marco like a physical blow. They didn't just see him as a witness anymore. In a case this old, with no leads, everyone was a suspect. The kid who just happened to swing a hammer in the exact right spot. It was too convenient, too neat. You don't think I had anything to do with this?" Marco stammered, his heart sinking. Gable's eyes were hard. "I think a woman has been missing for 14 years, and we just found her entombed in a wall you were paid to demolish. Right now, I'm not thinking anything. I'm collecting facts. And the fact is, you found her. So we start with you." As a uniformed officer led him to a waiting patrol car, Marco looked back at the gas station. It looked like a movie set, bathed in harsh light, crawling with people. It was a place of secrets, and he had just become one of them. The shock of the discovery was now curdling into a new, terrifying emotion: fear. He had stumbled into someone else's nightmare, and now, the nightmare was turning on him. The hand in the wall was no longer just a tragic mystery. It was an accusation, and it was pointing straight at him. He was no longer the discoverer of the body, he was the first suspect in a 14-year-old murder. The cliffhanger had found its victim. Her name was Lily Hayes. She was 19 years old when she disappeared. The photograph they showed Marco at the station was a high school portrait, a girl with a bright, hopeful smile and eyes the color of a summer sky. Her hair was long and blonde, feathered in a style that was popular in the early 2000s. She looked like a girl who had her whole life ahead of her. A life of proms and first loves and college applications. A life that had ended abruptly and brutally. Inside the wall of a forgotten gas station, the victim, Detective Gable, slid the photo across the cold metal table of the interrogation room. "Ever see her before?" Marco stared at the smiling face, a ghost from a different era. He shook his head. "No. I was 8 years old when she went missing." The math was simple, but the reality of it was staggering. While he was learning to ride a bike, she was being sealed into a wall. Lily had been a good girl, by all accounts. The local papers from 2011, which Gable's team had already pulled from the archives, painted a picture of a beloved daughter, a strata student, a part-time waitress at the town's only diner. She had dreams of being a veterinarian. She volunteered at the local animal shelter. On the night she vanished, she had just finished her shift at the diner. She'd clocked out at 10:05 p.m., said goodnight to her boss, and walked out into the cool October air. Her car, a beat-up Toyota Corolla, was found the next morning in the diner's parking lot. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her keys were in the ignition. But Lily was gone. The town had searched for weeks. Volunteers combed the woods. Police divers checked the rivers. Her face was on flyers tacked to every telephone pole and bulletin board for 100 miles. Missing. Lily Hayes. 19. Have you seen this girl? The hope in her smile became a haunting plea. But the leads dried up. The flyers faded and tore in the wind and rain. The town moved on, as towns do. The mystery of Lily Hayes became a local legend, a ghost story whispered by teenagers, a permanent, aching wound for the family she left behind. Her mother, Eleanor Hayes, still lived in the same small, tidy house where Lily had grown up. When Detective Gable and Deputy Miller knocked on her door, she already knew. A mother always knows. She hadn't seen the news yet, but she saw the grim expressions on their faces, the solemn set of their jaws, and the hope she had clung to. For 14 years finally, mercifully, died. She didn't cry, not at first. She just nodded, her face a mask of stoic grief, and invited them in. The house was a shrine to a lost child. Lily's high school graduation photo had pride of place on the mantelpiece. Her track and field trophies were arranged neatly on a shelf. The air was thick with the weight of her absence. "It was at the old Beacon station, wasn't it?" Eleanor asked, her voice raspy. Gable was taken aback. "How did you know?" "Her last paycheck," Eleanor said, her gaze distant. "From the diner, she never cashed it. I found it in her room. She'd written a note on the back. Gas money. She was always running on empty. Always worried about having enough gas to get to the community college in the next town over. The Beacon was the only station open late on that stretch of road back then. It was the first real lead in 14 years, a small, heartbreaking detail that connected Lily directly to her tomb. She had likely stopped for gas on her way home, a simple, mundane act that had led her into the hands of her killer. Eleanor finally broke then, her carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. The sobs that racked her body were the sound of 14 years of pent-up grief, of unanswered questions, of a love that had nowhere to go. She mourned not just the daughter she had lost, but the woman she had never had the chance to become. The antagonist. His name was Richard "Rick" Slade. In 2011, he was the night manager of the Beacon gas station. He was a man who lived in the shadows, both literally and figuratively. He was 35 at the time, a transient with a string of jobs and no real ties to the community. He was quiet, sullen, a man people noticed but never really saw. He had a reputation for being creepy with the female customers, for staring a little too long, for making comments that were just on the edge of inappropriate. But no one had ever filed a formal complaint. He was just that weird guy at the gas station. Slade had been questioned, of course, back when Lily first disappeared. He was on a long list of people the police had talked to. He'd told them he'd worked his shift that night, closed up around midnight, and gone home. He hadn't seen anything unusual. He hadn't seen Lily Hayes. He was a dead end, a minor character in a story that had no ending. He'd quit his job a few weeks after the disappearance, telling his boss he was moving back down south to take care of a sick relative. He'd packed up his small apartment, leaving nothing behind, and vanished as completely as Lily had. The police had no reason to suspect him, no evidence to hold him. He was just another person who had passed through town. But now, with the discovery of the body, Rick Slade was no longer a footnote. He was the prime suspect. The gas station had been his domain. The wall that had hidden Lily's body was in the back of the service bay. A place he would have had access to, a place that would have been dark and deserted in the dead of night. The construction was too clean, too precise, for a random act of violence. It was calculated. The killer had known how to build a wall. They had known how to hide a body in plain sight. The problem was, Rick Slade was a ghost. Gable's team ran his name through every database they had. They found a few old addresses, a couple of minor traffic violations from a decade ago, but then the trail went cold. He had dropped off the grid. No social security activity. No driver's license renewals. No credit history. It was as if, after leaving town, he had ceased to exist. He was a man who had perfected the art of being invisible. Finding him would be like hunting a phantom. But Gable was a patient man. He knew that even phantoms leave traces. He sent Slade's old grainy DMV photo to every law enforcement agency in the country. He put out an all-points bulletin. The hunt for the antagonist had begun. The hidden witness. His name was Javier Mendoza. In 2011, he was 16 years old, a scared kid working his first real job. He was the part-time janitor at the Beacon gas station, hired by Rick Slade to clean up the bays and empty the trash a few nights a week. He was undocumented, brought to the country by his parents as a small child. And he lived in constant low-grade fear of being discovered, of being sent back to a country he couldn't even remember. Javier was a good kid, quiet and hard-working. He kept his head down, did his job, and tried to be invisible. He needed the money to help his family, who were struggling to make ends meet. He was grateful to Rick Slade for giving him the job, for paying him in cash, no questions asked. But he was also terrified of him. He saw the way Slade looked at the girls who came in to pay for gas. He heard the things Slade would mutter under his breath after they left. He knew about the stack of pornographic magazines Slade kept hidden under the counter. Javier tried to stay out of his way, to do his work and get out as quickly as possible. On the night Lily Hayes disappeared, Javier was there. He was in the back, mopping the floor of the second service bay, the one that was rarely used. He had his headphones on, listening to music to drown out the silence of the empty station. But through the beat of a song, he heard something, a sound that didn't belong, a muffled scream. He pulled off his headphones, his heart suddenly pounding. He heard it again, clearer this time. A woman's voice, sharp with fear, coming from the main office. Then he heard Rick Slade's voice, low and menacing. "You're gonna be quiet now. You're gonna do exactly what I say." Javier froze, his mop handle clutched in his sweaty hands. Fear, cold and absolute, washed over him. He knew he should do something, he should run, he should call the police, but he was paralyzed. He was 16, he was illegal. What would he say? Who would believe him? Slade had been his benefactor, the man who gave him a job. But in that moment, Javier saw him for what he truly was, a predator. He crouched down behind a stack of old tires, his body trembling. He heard a struggle, the sound of something being knocked over, a sharp cry of pain that was cut off abruptly. Then, silence. A heavy, terrifying silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Javier stayed hidden for what felt like hours, his muscles cramping, his mind racing. He didn't see what happened next. He didn't see Slade move the body. He just heard sounds. The scrape of something being dragged across the concrete floor. The whir of a power drill. The rhythmic rasp of a saw cutting through drywall. He knew. He knew what Slade was doing. He was building a tomb. When the sounds finally stopped, Javier waited. He waited until he heard Slade's car start up and drive away. Then, and only then, did he dare to move. He crept out from his hiding place and ran. He ran all the way home, his lungs burning, his mind screaming. He didn't stop until he was safe in his own bed, the covers pulled up to his chin, shaking uncontrollably in the dark. He never went back to the gas station. He never collected his last week's pay. The next day, when the news broke about the missing girl, Lily Hayes, Javier knew he was the only one who knew the truth. But his fear was greater than his conscience. He was terrified of Slade, but he was also terrified of the police, of deportation, of what would happen to his family if he came forward. So he said nothing. He buried the secret deep inside him, a toxic poison that would eat away at his soul for the next 14 years. He watched the news reports of the search parties. He saw the tearful pleas from Lily's mother. Each one was a knife in his gut. He carried the weight of his silence like a physical burden, a stoop in his shoulders, a haunted look in his eyes that never quite went away. He grew up, got married, had children of his own. He became a legal resident, a respectable contractor, a man who built walls for a living. The irony was not lost on him now. 14 years later, Javier Mendoza was a man in his early 30s, living a quiet life in a town 100 miles away. When he saw the news report on television, the crumbling gas station, the hole in the wall, the discovery of a body, the past came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. The secret he had kept for half his life was out. He saw the face of the young construction worker, Marco, his face pale with shock. And Javier felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. He looked at his own daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib, her small hand curled around his finger, and he knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. The fear was still there, a cold, familiar knot in his stomach. But it was now overshadowed by a different feeling, the crushing weight of guilt, and the desperate belated need to do the right thing. He was no longer a scared 16-year-old kid, he was a man, and he was the only one who could give Lily Hayes the justice she had been denied for so long. The hidden witness was about to step out of the shadows. The media descended on the town like a flock of vultures. The story had everything: a beautiful young victim, a 14-year-old mystery, a gruesome discovery, and a faceless phantom killer. The old Beacon gas station became a ghoulish tourist attraction. News vans with satellite dishes sprouting from their roofs lined Route 7. Reporters with perfect hair and predatory smiles shoved microphones in the faces of anyone who looked like they might have a soundbite. For Lily's mother, Eleanor, it was a living hell. Her private grief was now a public spectacle. Her home was besieged. Cameras flashed every time she opened her front door. The reporters didn't want truth. They wanted tears. They wanted rage. They wanted a grieving mother to perform for their cameras. Mrs. Hayes, how does it feel to know your daughter was lying there, just a few miles away, all this time? Mrs. Hayes, do you have a message for the killer? The injustice was a physical assault. The man who had murdered her daughter was a ghost. But his crime was now being broadcast in high definition, replayed and analyzed and sensationalized. The focus shifted from the victim to the spectacle. Lily was becoming a headline, a hashtag, a tragic footnote in her own story. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. For Marco, the glare of the spotlight was a different kind of torture. His name and face were everywhere. He was the gas station worker who found the body. He was hailed as a hero by some, a potential suspect by others. The internet, in its infinite wisdom and cruelty, had already tried and convicted him in the court of public opinion. Anonymous commenters spun wild theories. He was in on it. He knew the body was there. He was covering for someone. His life was turned upside down. He lost his job with Sal, who didn't want the media attention. He was afraid to leave his house. The shock of his discovery had been replaced by the slow, grinding misery of suspicion. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand. His life, collateral damage in a 14-year-old crime, and the antagonist, Rick Slade, grew bolder in his invisibility. From wherever he was hiding, he must have been watching the news, watching the chaos unfold. He must have been laughing. He had gotten away with it for 14 years. He had built the perfect tomb, committed the perfect crime. And now, he was watching the world tear itself apart trying to solve it, while he remained safe in the shadows. The police manhunt was turning up nothing. Slade had covered his tracks too well. He had become a master of non-existence. The lack of leads was a daily humiliation for Detective Gable and his team. The pressure from the public and the media was immense. They were chasing a ghost, and the ghost was winning. The conflict escalated when the official autopsy report was leaked. To the press, the details were brutal. Lily Hayes had not died quickly. There were signs of a struggle. She had been bound. She had been alive when the wall was sealed. The cause of death was asphyxiation. She had suffocated in the dark, her last moments filled with unimaginable terror. The news sent a fresh wave of horror and outrage through the community. The killer wasn't just a murderer. He was a monster of unparalleled cruelty. The leak was a devastating blow to the investigation, and a betrayal for Eleanor. Her daughter's final horrific moments were now public knowledge, fodder for talk shows and true crime podcasts. The humiliation was absolute. She retreated further into her home, refusing to speak to anyone, her grief now curdled with a rage. She felt like she was failing her daughter all over again, unable to protect her memory from the salacious curiosity of the world. It was in this pressure cooker of media frenzy, public outrage, and investigative frustration that Javier Mendoza finally found his courage. He had been watching the circus from afar, his guilt a constant gnawing presence. He saw the pain in Eleanor Hayes' eyes. He saw the fear and confusion on Marco's young face. He saw the ghost of Rick Slade looming over all of them, a specter of evil who was getting away with it. He knew he held the key. He was the missing piece. His testimony could connect Slade directly to the crime scene, to the time of death, to the sounds of the tomb being built. But coming forward meant exposing himself, his family, to the very same media storm that was destroying Eleanor and Marco. It meant facing the questions, the scrutiny, the judgment. It meant admitting his own cowardice, his 14 years of silence. His wife Maria saw the struggle in his eyes. "What is it, Javier?" she asked one night, as he stared at the television, his face a mask of torment. "What is troubling you so much?" He finally told her everything. The story came pouring out of him, a torrent of guilt and fear that he had held back for 14 years. He told her about the janitor job, about the creepy manager, about the scream he heard, about the sounds of the wall being built. He told her about his fear, his silence, his shame. Maria listened without judgment, her hand resting on his arm. When he was finished, the only sound in the room was his own ragged breathing. "You have to tell them," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You have to tell the police." "But Maria, what if they don't believe me? What if they look into my past, my family? We are citizens now, Javier," she said, her eyes meeting his. "We have nothing to hide. But that girl, Lily, and her mother. They deserve the truth. You have been carrying this burden for too long. It is time to put it down." The decision was made. The next morning, Javier Mendoza drove the 100 miles back to his old hometown. He walked into the police station, his heart pounding, and asked to speak to Detective Gable. He was a man walking into the fire, not knowing if he would be consumed by it, but knowing he could no longer stand on the sidelines. The witness was about to break his silence, and the conflict was about to reach its breaking point. The injustice had festered for 14 years, but the time for secrets was over. The interview room was small and airless. The same room where they had questioned Marco. Javier sat across from Detective Gable, the weight of 14 years pressing down on him. He told his story, his voice quiet but steady. He didn't spare himself. He detailed his own fear, his own cowardice. He recounted every detail he could remember from that night. The time, the song he was listening to, the specific chilling sound of Slade's voice. "I heard him dragging something," Javier said, his eyes fixed on the table. "It was a heavy sound like a bag of cement, but softer. And then the tools started. I knew he was a handyman. He was always fixing things around the station. I heard the drill, the saw. I knew he was putting up drywall." Gable listened, his expression unreadable, letting Javier talk. He had heard 1,000 stories in his career, 1,000 confessions and lies and half-truths. But this felt different. This felt like the truth, raw and unvarnished, delivered by a man who had been haunted by it for more than a decade. "Why didn't you come forward then, Mr. Mendoza?" Gable asked, his voice even. "I was a kid," Javier whispered. "I was scared of him, scared of you, scared you'd send my parents away. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth. And why now?" Javier looked up, and for the first time, Gable saw the full depth of the man's remorse. "Because I have a daughter now, and I saw that poor woman, Lily's mother, on the news, and I saw the boy who found her. His life is being ruined. I built my life on a foundation of silence. Detective Kaya built walls around my secret. I can't do it anymore. It's time to tear them down." Javier's testimony was the break Gable had been praying for. It placed Rick Slade at the scene. It gave him the means and the opportunity, and it provided a chilling eyewitness account of the crime's immediate aftermath. It was the first solid piece of evidence they had, but it was still one man's word against a ghost. They needed something more. They needed to find Slade. The search intensified. Gable's team worked around the clock, chasing down every ghost of a lead. They re-interviewed everyone who had ever worked at the Beacon. They dug into Slade's past, trying to find a family member, an old friend, anyone who might know where he had gone. But it was like he had been erased from the earth. The pressure on Javier was immense. His name was leaked to the press, and he became the new focus of the media storm. He was the secret witness. He was lauded as a hero by some, a coward who had stayed silent for too long by others. His quiet life was shattered. Reporters camped outside his house. His contracting business suffered. He was paying the price for his silence, and now for his honesty. He had done the right thing, but it felt like a punishment. The injustice was relentless. The antagonist was still free, still invisible, while the lives of those he had touched continued to unravel. The tension was a wire-pulled taut, ready to snap. And then, it did. The plot twist didn't come from a dusty file or a forgotten clue. It came from the digital ether, a ghost in the machine. While Detective Gable's team was chasing the phantom of Rick Slade across the physical world, a young tech-savvy analyst on his team named Chloe was chasing his digital ghost. She had been painstakingly rebuilding Slade's online footprint, or lack thereof. He had no social media, no email accounts. Under his own name, nothing. He was a digital void. But Chloe was persistent. She operated on the principle that no one is truly invisible in the modern world. Everyone leaves a trace. Working on a hunch, she started cross-referencing old employee records from the Beacon's parent company, a corporate behemoth called Petromax. She was looking for any digital overlap, any connection, however faint, between Slade and other employees. It was a tedious, mind-numbing process. And then she found it. It wasn't a direct link to Slade, but to his old boss, the regional manager for Petromax in 2011, a man named Gerald Finch. Finch was a company man, a mid-level executive who had overseen dozens of gas stations. He had been interviewed briefly after Lily's disappearance, a routine check, and had provided nothing of value. He had retired a few years later, a man who had faded into comfortable obscurity. Chloe discovered that Finch had maintained a private anonymous blog for years, a place where he vented his frustrations about his job, his life, his failed marriage. It was mostly banal, self-pitying, drivel, but as she scrolled back through the archives, to the entries from October 2011, her blood ran cold. The blog post was dated October 19, 2011, 2 days after Lily Hayes disappeared. It was titled Loose. It was rambling and paranoid, but buried within the text was a single, explosive paragraph. The night guy at the Route 7 station is a problem. A real psycho. Called me in the middle of the night, rambling, incoherent. Said there was an incident, a girl, an accident. He said he took care of it. I told him to keep his mouth shut. I told him the company would handle it. A scandal is the last thing we need. The quarterly reports are already in the red. We can't have a media circus. I'll make sure the problem is contained. A little plaster, a little paint. People. Forget, the company protects its own. Chloe stared at the screen, her heart pounding. It wasn't just Slade, it was a conspiracy. A cover-up. Finch, the regional manager, knew. He hadn't just known, he had facilitated it. He had chosen to protect the company's bottom line over a young woman's life. He had helped Slade bury the secret, not just in a wall, but under layers of corporate silence and plausible deniability. This changed everything. It was no longer about a lone psychotic killer, it was about a cold, calculated corporate conspiracy. The full, horrifying picture was starting to emerge. Slade had killed Lily, in a fit of rage or a moment of predatory impulse. He had panicked and called his boss, and Finch, instead of calling the police, had made a business decision. He had authorized the cover-up. He had probably even supplied the materials for the wall. The precision of the construction suddenly made sense. It wasn't just Slade, it was a company-sanctioned burial. Gable read the blog post, his face grim. The tired fatherly detective was gone, replaced by a man filled with a cold, righteous fury. He now had the leverage he needed. He had the twist that would break the case wide open. They found Gerald Finch living in a golf community in Florida. A sun-weathered man in his late 60s, living a life of leisure paid for by his corporate pension and his silence. When Gable and a team of local police showed up at his door, he was genuinely shocked. He had believed the secret was as buried as Lily's body. At first, he denied everything. He was a retired old man. He barely remembered Rick Slade. He certainly didn't remember any late-night phone calls. He was a pillar of his community. Then Gable slid a printout of the blog post across the table. "Loose ends," he said, his voice like ice. "Does this refresh your memory, Mr. Finch?" The color drained from Finch's tanned face. The mask of affable retirement crumbled, revealing the terrified, cornered executive beneath. He tried to bluster, to claim it was fiction, a story. But the details were too specific. The date, The mention of the Route 7 station. The night guy, you left a girl to rot in a wall to protect your quarterly earnings. Gable said, his voice low and menacing. You let her mother live in torment for 14 years. You let a monster walk free. All for what? A stock option. A bonus. Finch broke. The confession came out in a flood of pathetic, self-serving excuses. It was a mistake. A moment of panic. Slade was a loose cannon, a liability. He was trying to protect the company, his employees, his own career. He claimed he didn't know Slade had killed her. He thought it was an accident, an overdose, something that could be quietly swept under the rug. He admitted to telling Slade to handle it, to make it go away. He admitted to authorizing the expense for the construction materials, burying the cost in a maintenance budget, and then he gave them the final piece of the puzzle. The key to finding Rick Slade. He had a sister, Finch stammered, his voice trembling. In Oregon, he always talked about going out there, to live off the grid. He was obsessed with it. Her name is Karen Bishop. It was the lead they had been missing. A name, a location. The ghost was about to become flesh and blood. The tension cranked to its absolute maximum. While a team was dispatched to Oregon to find Slade, Gable had to make a decision. He had Finch in custody. He had the confession. He had the conspiracy. The story was about to explode, to shift from a local tragedy to a national scandal involving a major corporation. The stakes were no longer just about finding justice for Lily. They were about exposing a rot that went far deeper. Gable called Eleanor Hayes. He told her they had made a breakthrough. He told her about Finch, about the cover-up. He didn't give her all the brutal details, but he gave her enough. He gave her a target for her rage, a face to her daughter's injustice that wasn't just a grainy DMV photo of a phantom. It was a man in a suit, a corporation. And then he called Javier Mendoza. I need you to do something for me, Javier. Gable said, I need you to be ready. When we find him, I want you to be there. Be there? What for? Javier asked, his voice tight with anxiety. For Lily, Gable said simply. I want him to see you. I want him to see that the wall he built wasn't strong enough to hold his secret forever. The stage was set. The manhunt was closing in. The conspiracy was about to be exposed. The personal pain of a few individuals was about to ignite a public firestorm. The plot had twisted, and now it was coiling, ready to strike with a cinematic, explosive force that would bring a 14-year-old nightmare to its long-overdue public conclusion. The wait was almost over. The house was at the end of a long, muddy logging road, deep in the rain-soaked forests of coastal Oregon. It was less a house and more a shack, a ramshackle construction of weathered wood and corrugated tin, hunkered down against the perpetual drizzle. A thin plume of smoke curled from a rusty stovepipe, the only sign of life. This was where the ghost lived. Rick Slade, or Rick Bishop, as he now called himself, had done a good job of disappearing. He lived off the grid, hunting, trapping, taking odd cash jobs in the nearest town, a place where people didn't ask questions. He was gaunt, his face hidden behind a thick matted beard, his eyes the only recognizable feature from the old DMV photo. They were the same cold, dead eyes. He didn't see the unmarked cars until they were already blocking the only road out. He didn't see the heavily armed officers from the state police and the FBI fanning out through the trees, creating a perimeter. He was chopping wood when the voice came through a bullhorn, sharp and clear, cutting through the quiet of the forest. Richard Slade, this is the police. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands in the air. Slade froze, the axe held loosely in his hand. For a moment, he just stood there, a cornered animal, his mind racing. 14 years, he had almost made it. He had almost outrun the ghost of the girl in the wall. He made a run for the shack. It was a foolish, desperate move. A warning shot splintered the wood of the doorframe next to his head. He stumbled inside, slamming the flimsy door shut. The standoff was tense but brief. Slade was not a survivalist. He was a coward. He had no intention of a firefight. He was just buying time, his panicked mind trying to find a way out where there was none. Inside the shack, he scrambled to destroy the few things that connected him to his past, shoving old letters and photographs into the wood stove, but it was too late. His past had found him. After 20 minutes, he emerged, his hands held high, his face a mask of defeated rage. The ghost had been caught. The cinematic payoff was not a shootout. It was something far more brutal, far more satisfying. Detective Gable had orchestrated it perfectly. He had flown Javier Mendoza to Oregon. He had also, after much debate and against protocol, flown in Eleanor Hayes. He had her sequestered in a car at the command post, out of sight, but close enough. He believed she had earned the right to see the man who had destroyed her life, to see him in chains. As they led Slade in handcuffs toward a waiting vehicle, Gable gave a signal. A detective brought Javier forward, positioning him directly in Slade's path. Slade looked up, his eyes scanning the faces of the officers, and then he saw him. He saw the face of the 16-year-old janitor he had hired all those years ago. The boy he had terrified into silence. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a flash of pure, undiluted hatred. "You," Slade spat, his voice a venomous rasp. "You fucking rat." Javier stood his ground, his fear, finally, completely gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Slade, his gaze unwavering. In his eyes, Slade didn't see a scared boy anymore. He saw a man. He saw a witness. He saw the architect of his downfall. The silence was more powerful than any accusation. It was the sound of justice, long delayed. It was the sound of a secret that had refused to stay buried. Slade lunged, a guttural roar of fury erupting from his chest. But the officers held him fast, shoving him forward. And then came the second blow. As they pushed Slade past the command post vehicle, Detective Gable opened the rear door. Eleanor Hayes stepped out. She was no longer the broken, grieving mother. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a fire that had been smoldering for 14 years. She stood just a few feet away, and her gaze locked onto Slade's. He stopped struggling. He just stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He had buried her daughter, but he had never had to face the mother. He had never had to confront the life he had stolen, personified in the woman standing before him. "Do you know who I am?" Eleanor's voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a shard of glass. Slade couldn't speak. He just stared, his face ashen. "I am Lily's mother," she said, her voice breaking on the name, but regaining its strength immediately. "I want you to look at me. I want you to see my face every time you close your eyes for the rest of your miserable life. You didn't just kill my daughter. You erased a world. You erased birthdays, and holidays, and a wedding I'll never plan, and grandchildren I'll never hold. You built a wall of plaster, but I have lived inside a wall of grief every single day for 14 years. She took a step closer, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. The officers tensed, but Gable held up a hand. Her name was Lily, Eleanor whispered, her voice now thick with unshed tears. She wanted to be a vet. She loved animals. She had a laugh that could fill a room. I want you to know that. I want you to know who it was you left to die in the dark. Slade finally broke. He squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away. Unable to bear her gaze, he couldn't face her. He couldn't face the humanity of his crime. The monster had been confronted by the mother of his victim, and he had crumbled. It was the perfect poetic justice. Not a fistfight, not a courtroom bombshell, but a quiet, devastating confrontation on a muddy logging road. The public arrest was a viral sensation. The footage, captured by a police body cam and later leaked, was played on every news channel. The image of the silent, stoic witness and the grieving, defiant mother facing down the killer was an emotional explosion. It was the catharsis the public had been craving. The trial of Rick Slade and Gerald Finch was a media circus. But the outcome was never in doubt. Javier's testimony was unshakable. Finch's confession and the blog post sealed the corporate conspiracy. Petromax was hit with a storm of lawsuits and a public relations nightmare from which it would never fully recover. Their stock plummeted. The brand became synonymous with corporate evil. Slade was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Finch, for his role in the cover-up and accessory after the fact, received a sentence of 25 years. He would die. In prison, the cinematic payoff was complete. Justice, public and explosive, had been delivered. The ghosts of the Beacon gas station had finally been heard, their story told to the world. The wall had been torn down, and the ugly truth it had hidden was now exposed to the light for all to see. For Eleanor, for Javier, and for Marco, the long nightmare was finally over. But the echoes of the crime would linger, a haunting reminder of the cost of secrets and the price of truth. The emotional aftermath was not a celebration. There were no victory parties, no triumphant headlines that could erase the 14 years of pain. There was only a quiet, somber sense of closure, a heavy silence where the storm had once raged. The old Beacon gas station was torn down. The developer, horrified by the property's history, sold the land to the town for $1. The community came together, and in place of the concrete bays and rusty pumps, they built a small park. It was a simple place, with a few benches, a swing set, and a garden filled with lilies of every color. In the center of the garden, there was a single, polished granite stone. It didn't have a date of death, it just had a name and a simple inscription: Lily Hayes. Her light was not extinguished, it was just hidden for a while. Eleanor Hayes came to the park every day. She would sit on a bench, sometimes for hours, just watching the children play on the swings, their laughter filling the air. The rage had faded, leaving behind a profound, aching sadness, but it was a clean sadness now, unburdened by the poison of not knowing. She had gotten justice for her daughter. She had faced the monster. She had spoken Lily's name to his face. It was not a happy ending, but it was an ending. She could finally mourn. One afternoon, as she was tending to the lilies, a young man approached her hesitantly. It was Marco. He hadn't seen her since the trial. He looked older than his years, the carefree innocence of his youth, replaced by a quiet maturity. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice soft, I just wanted to see how you were doing." Eleanor stood up, wiping the dirt from her hands. She gave him a small, sad smile. "I'm all right, Marco, thank you, and thank you for finding her. You gave her back to me." "I'm just sorry for what you had to go through," he said. "We all went through it," she replied, her gaze sweeping across the park. "But it's over now." They stood in silence for a moment, two strangers bound together by a tragedy. Marco had gone back to construction, but something had changed in him. He looked at old buildings differently now, wondering what secrets they held, what stories were hidden in their walls. The ghost of the reaching hand still visited him sometimes in his dreams, but it was no longer an accusation. It was a reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of truth. Javier Mendoza and his family moved away. They sold their house and their business and started over in a new state where no one knew their names. He had done the right thing, but the glare of the media had been too much. He had testified, he had faced Slade, he had helped put him away. His conscience was finally clear, but his life had been irrevocably altered. He had paid a heavy price for his 14 years of silence, and an equally heavy price for his eventual honesty. He found peace not in public accolades, but in the private, quiet life he was able to build for his family. Far from the ghosts of Route 7, he had torn down the walls around his own heart, and in doing so, had found a different kind of freedom. Last lingering echo of the crime belonged to Detective Gable. He retired a year after the trial. The Lily Hayes case had been the biggest of his career, the one that had consumed him, the one that would define his legacy. But it had also taken a piece of him. He had seen the worst of humanity in Rick Slade's cold eyes and Gerald Finch's casual cruelty. But he had also seen the best of it. He had seen the quiet courage of Javier Mendoza, the fierce, unwavering love of Eleanor Hayes, and the accidental, life-faltering integrity of a young man named Marco, who just went to work one day and refused to ignore something that felt wrong. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Gable would drive by the little park where the gas station used to be. He would see the lights of the town twinkling around it. He would see families walking their dogs. He would see the lilies blooming in the garden. He knew that the world would mostly forget the story of what happened there. The news cycle would move on, the outrage would fade, and the names of Lily Hayes and Rick Slade would become footnotes in the annals of true crime. But for those who had lived it, the echo would remain. It was a haunting reflection on the cost of truth, a bittersweet reminder that even after justice is served, the scars remain. The world keeps spinning, but for a mother, a witness, a detective, and a young construction worker, a part of them would forever be in that quiet park, standing before a granite stone, remembering a girl who loved animals, whose laugh could fill a room, and whose light, though hidden for a time, could never truly be extinguished. The silence there wasn't empty, it was filled with her memory. And in the end, that was a kind of victory.